mentioned that in the log, that they'd steamed a little over 15,000 miles in total.
In 1909, a passenger named Claude Gustave Sawyer boarded a ship that would soon become the center of one of the most enduring mysteries in maritime history. The vessel was the SS Waratah, a passenger and cargo steamship operated by the Blue Anchor Line. On the surface, it looked like a proud achievement of its time, a modern ship that promised both safety and luxury. But what happened on that voyage has left historians, sailors, and enthusiasts puzzled for over a century.
A legend, maybe an urban legend, but I think there's a lot of truth in it, that the woman who lived here many years ago came wandering up the driveway with a niece of hers, knocked on the doorway and said, could she please come in? And she said, I have a story about your avocado tree, and proceeded to tell us that it had been a group of seedlings brought out from Australia by a man called Claude Sawyer, who had subsequently, he was fortunate enough to get off the Waratah, which subsequently disappeared without trace. The avocado pips had been growing in little jars of water, which worried Sawyer because the water kept on spilling out. You know, he could tell that the jars were not level, and I suppose he could tell from a lot of other things too. But he obviously had the seedlings in the cabin with him because they came off the ship with him.
Sawyer, who was a seasoned traveler and an engineer by trade, began his journey much like any other passenger. At the time, traveling long distances by sea was common, and for many people, it was the only practical way to move between continents. The Waratah was on her second major voyage, taking passengers and goods from Australia to South Africa and eventually on to England. For the Blue Anchor Line, this ship represented growth and prestige. For the passengers, it was supposed to be a reliable way to cross dangerous waters.
Conker never said he saw the Waratah disappear. He said he saw a ship with a black hull and coffee-colored upper deck works roll over and sink. It was a very accurate description.
But something about this voyage was different, and Sawyer felt it almost immediately. According to his own later accounts, his concerns began with a disturbing dream that struck him while on board. He described being woken in the middle of the night, stepping out onto the deck, and seeing an unsettling vision. In his dream, the night sky glowed red, and the sea appeared rough and hostile. Out in the distance, a dark figure emerged from the water. It carried a sword in one hand and a dripping cloth in the other. The figure came closer and closer, repeating the same word over and over, Waratah. Sawyer then woke up suddenly, shaken by the vividness of what he had seen.
You know, I think they did their homework. It was the right size. Everything was right. It's just you don't ever know until you actually get on a wreck what it is. And this has happened to us many times, as I said. Sometimes it's for the better. You find something more interesting than you're looking for. Other times it's a disappointment like this one was.
Many people might dismiss such a dream as just a product of the mind. Traveling at sea was not always comfortable. The constant movement of the ship, the unfamiliar environment, and the anxiety of being far from home could all affect sleep. But for Sawyer, this dream did not feel like an ordinary nightmare. It left him with a sense of dread that lingered long after he woke. He said that he could not shake the feeling that it meant something more. As the days went on, the same vision returned to him, repeating night after night. The mysterious figure, the dripping cloth, the sword, and the voice calling out Waratah haunted his sleep. It was not just the images themselves that troubled him, but the persistence of them. To experience the same dream over and over again convinced him that something was wrong. Sawyer began to share his concerns with others on the ship. While some passengers listened politely, most dismissed the idea that a dream could mean anything significant. Superstitions were not uncommon at sea, but many people trusted in the Waratah as a modern ship, built with the latest design improvements. For them, there was no reason to worry, but Sawyer was not so easily reassured. He was not only educated, but also experienced when it came to sea travel. He had been on ships before and understood what was normal and what was not. In his mind, the Waratah did not feel entirely safe. He later explained that the ship seemed unstable, even in calmer seas. At times it leaned heavily to one side and then corrected itself with such force that people could be thrown off balance. This behavior, combined with his recurring dreams, convinced him that he should not continue the journey. When the Waratah finally reached Durban, a major port in South Africa, Sawyer made his decision. He would not sail any further on this ship. Instead, he disembarked and arranged to continue his journey to Cape Town on another vessel. He even tried to convince fellow passengers to leave with him, but no one else took his warnings seriously. To them, the Waratah was solid, and the crew seemed capable. Leaving the ship on the basis of a dream must have seemed irrational at the time. Sawyer's choice, however, proved to be a turning point in his life. Just days after he disembarked, the Waratah left Durban and continued her journey toward Cape Town. She never arrived. The ship vanished without a trace, along with more than 200 people on board. Despite extensive searches, carried out in the weeks and months that followed, no wreckage was ever confirmed. The Waratah simply disappeared into the ocean, leaving behind only rumors, reports, and unanswered questions. For those who knew Sawyer's story, the connection between his dreams and the ship's disappearance seemed chilling. Some described his visions as premonitions, warnings that something terrible was about to happen. Others viewed them more skeptically, suggesting that he might have exaggerated the details afterwards, once the Waratah was already lost. Whatever the truth, the timing was striking. The idea of dreams as warnings is not new, and at the time, many people were fascinated by the possibility that Sawyer had been given a glimpse of the future. Newspapers picked up on his story, turning it into a point of public discussion. Was it a coincidence, or was there something supernatural at play? Did Sawyer's subconscious pick up on signs of danger that his conscious mind could not explain? These questions remain open-ended, but they help cement the Waratah's reputation as not just a tragedy, but also a mystery with a ghostly edge. Beyond the dream itself, Sawyer's decision shows something about human instinct. While most passengers chose to stay on board, trusting the ship and its crew, he acted on his sense of unease. In hindsight, that choice saved his life. It is easy to imagine how difficult that decision must have been. Abandoning a ship mid-voyage was costly, inconvenient, and socially awkward. It meant separating from fellow passengers and interrupting travel plans. But Sawyer valued his intuition enough to take that step, and history proved him right. When historians look back at this case, they note that Sawyer's account adds a deeply personal layer to what would otherwise be a technical story about a ship's disappearance. Maritime history is full of accidents and disasters, but few of them include such a clear example of someone leaving behind a first-hand warning. His dreams turned the Waratah from a lost ship into something more, a legend that blends fact, fear, and folklore. When the SS Waratah was first launched in 1908, it was seen as a major step forward for the Blue Anchor Line, a shipping company already known for its role in connecting Britain, South Africa, and Australia. At the time, global trade and migration relied heavily on ships like this. Families moving across continents, businesses sending cargo, and governments relying on secure shipping routes, all depended on vessels that could combine speed, capacity, and safety. The Waratah was supposed to be one of those ships, a new flagship that would set a higher standard for the company. The Blue Anchor Line itself had been established decades earlier. Founded by William Lund in 1869, it originally used sailing ships to carry passengers and goods between London, South Africa, and Australia. The late 19th century was a period of rapid change in shipping, with steam technology replacing sails and allowing for more reliable schedules. By the 1890s, Lund and his sons had decided to modernize their fleet by moving into steamers, ships that could transport not only cargo but also paying passengers. This was important because it meant the company could make money on both ends of the voyage, emigrants heading to Australia, and valuable goods being shipped back to Britain. The ships of the Blue Anchor Line had a distinctive look. Their funnels were painted black and white, marked with a blue anchor symbol, which became a sign of recognition for travelers who relied on their services. By the early 1900s, the company was ready to expand even further, and the Waratah was ordered to be the largest and most luxurious vessel they had ever owned. The contract for building the new ship went to Barclay, Curle and Company, a well-known shipyard in Glasgow, Scotland. The Waratah was built as yard number 472 and was closely based on an earlier liner, the SS Geelong, launched in 1904. The Geelong had already proven successful, weighing about 7,700 tons and serving the company well. The Waratah was designed to be larger, nearly 2,000 tons heavier, and with greater passenger capacity. It was meant to embody both practicality and luxury, carrying everything from emigrants to wool, meat and bullion, while also offering comfort for wealthier travelers. On September 12, 1908, the Waratah was officially launched. The ceremony was attended by company officials and local dignitaries, with Mrs. J.W. Taverner given the honor of christening the ship. Strangely, her first name was not recorded in any official documents or reports, something that remains an odd historical footnote. The Waratah measured 465 feet in length and just over 59 feet across, with a total tonnage of 9,339 tons. Powered by two quadruple expansion steam engines driving twin propellers, the ship was capable of reaching a cruising speed of around 13.5 knots. This speed was respectable for the period, especially for a vessel designed to carry heavy cargo and large groups of people. The ship was also built with safety in mind, at least according to the standards of the day. Its hull had a double bottom, and the interior was divided into 8 watertight compartments, a design feature intended to reduce the risk of flooding in the event of damage. These safety features, combined with its size and modern construction, led many to believe that the Waratah was practically unsinkable, an assumption that history would later challenge in the harshest way possible. Inside, the Waratah was fitted to cater to different classes of passengers. For the wealthy, there were 128 first-class accommodations, including well-furnished staterooms, a grand dining saloon, and a music lounge. These features were designed not only for comfort but also for status, giving passengers the impression that they were traveling on a floating hotel. For those who could not afford first-class travel, the ship offered space for 300 third-class passengers. On top of that, it could carry up to 700 steerage passengers, mostly emigrants, by converting its cargo holds into dormitories for the outward voyage. This versatility was a clever business decision. When carrying emigrants to Australia, the ship could maximize passenger numbers, and on the return trip to Britain, those same spaces could be filled with wool, frozen meat, dairy products, flour, and other goods. A crew of 154 officers and sailors operated the Waratah. At the head of the crew was Captain Joshua Edward Ilbery, a veteran of more than 30 years at sea. His appointment was seen as a sign that the ship was in experienced hands. For passengers, knowing that an old hand like Ilbery was in command would have offered reassurance, especially since sea travel still carried risks from storms, mechanical breakdowns, and navigational errors. The Waratah passed its sea trials on October 23, 1908, and was handed over to the Blue Anchor Line soon after. Its first official voyage began in November of that year, when it left London bound for Australia. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but there were already signs that not everything about the ship was as perfect as hoped. During this maiden voyage, a fire broke out in the engine room. Fires at sea were a serious threat, particularly in coal-powered steamships, as they could spread quickly and cause catastrophic damage. In this case, the fire was contained and extinguished, and repairs were carried out when the ship reached Sydney. The incident did not cause a disaster, but it showed that the Waratah was not immune to the kinds of dangers that plagued even the most advanced ships of the era. The Waratah eventually returned to London on March 7, 1909, completing its first full voyage. While the journey was technically a success, there were growing concerns behind the scenes. Captain Ilbery, in particular, had begun to express unease about the ship's stability. He reported that it was difficult to load the vessel in a way that kept it balanced, an issue that made handling the ship more challenging. These concerns did not stop the Waratah from being sent out on her next voyage. After all, the ship had passed its inspections, including checks from Lloyd's of London, which gave it the highest safety rating available. The Board of Trade also reviewed the vessel and found no reason to prevent it from sailing again. In the early 20th century, such certificates carried great weight, and they reassured both the company and the traveling public that the ship was sound. Still, rumors of instability followed the Waratah, especially among passengers who had traveled on her maiden voyage. Some described the ship as rolling more than others, with sudden movements that could make standing or walking difficult. One passenger even claimed that the tilting was so pronounced that it was impossible to take a bath without being thrown around. Others, however, spoke highly of the ship. They described it as comfortable and well run, praising both the crew and the accommodations. This division of opinion is one of the details that continues to make the Waratah's story fascinating. Was it really unstable, or were these just ordinary quirks that became exaggerated after its disappearance? In April 1909, the SS Waratah left London once again, beginning what would become her second and final voyage. This trip was supposed to be another routine journey to Australia and back, carrying passengers, emigrants, and valuable cargo. To most observers, the Waratah was still a symbol of modern engineering, new and strong, and commanded by an experienced captain. But for some who traveled aboard, small signs of trouble began to appear. The voyage started on April 27, 1909. At first, things went as planned. The ship traveled south, stopping at ports along the way. After crossing to the other side of the world, she arrived in Sydney by June, carrying passengers and goods as expected. On the surface, everything looked fine. Yet, behind the smooth progress, there were warnings that the Waratah was not entirely steady. From Sydney, the Waratah continued along the Australian coast, making stops in Melbourne and Adelaide. During this leg of the journey, the ship faced heavy weather. Passengers later reported that the Waratah rolled violently in the waves, and even in calmer conditions, she sometimes leaned to one side before righting herself with a sudden movement. For some people on board, this felt unusual, and it raised concerns about the ship's balance. For others, it was simply part of ocean travel. Ships often moved in unpredictable ways, and most passengers had no way of knowing whether what they were experiencing was normal or not. Among those who noticed the Waratah's strange behavior was Claude Gustave Sawyer, the same man who would later become central to the story of the ship's disappearance. Sawyer was not just any traveler. He was an engineer, well educated, and used to sea voyages. He began to worry about how the ship handled, saying it leaned heavily to starboard, or the right side, and then corrected itself with such force that people could be thrown off their feet. On one occasion, 2 women passengers, and even the ship's doctor, were injured during one of these sudden movements. Sawyer tried to raise his concerns with others, warning that he believed the ship might not be safe, but most dismissed his warnings. By late June, the Waratah had loaded additional cargo in Adelaide, including wool, frozen meat, flour, dairy products, and a quantity of bullion. She was now heavily laden, and this only added to worries about her stability. Still, the ship left Adelaide on July 7, 1909, with around 100 passengers and more than 200 crew on board. Her next destination was Durban, on the east coast of South Africa. It was during this part of the voyage that Sawyer began to experience the vivid and disturbing dreams that would later become famous. Each night, he saw the same ghostly figure emerging from the sea, carrying a sword and a dripping cloth, repeating the word Waratah. The dreams grew stronger and more troubling, convincing him that the ship was doomed. Sawyer tried again to warn others, telling fellow passengers that he intended to leave the ship at Durban. Most laughed off his fears, but one or two admitted that the Waratah did not feel quite right. Still, no one else planned to disembark. When the Waratah finally reached Durban, Sawyer acted on his instincts. He got off the ship and booked passage to Cape Town on another vessel. He even urged some of the passengers he had spoken with to join him, but none accepted. To them, the Waratah was still modern, still strong, and still captained by a man with decades of experience. There seemed no reason to abandon the voyage halfway. On July 26, 1909, the Waratah left Durban, continuing her journey along the South African coast toward Cape Town. The next day, she was sighted by another ship, the Clan McIntyre, near the Bashi River. The two ships exchanged signals as the Waratah overtook the slower steamer. The captain of the Clan McIntyre later recalled that the sea was rough and the weather worsening. The Waratah, larger and newer, pressed on ahead. That was the last confirmed sighting of the ship. When the Waratah failed to arrive in Cape Town, concern grew quickly. At first, there was some hope that the delay was simply due to weather. Ships were sometimes late by days, or even weeks, depending on conditions. But as more time passed, the lack of any news became alarming. Families waiting for passengers, shipping companies expecting goods, and authorities in South Africa all began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Search efforts began almost immediately. The tugboat T.E. Fuller was sent out to look for the missing ship, but rough seas forced it to return. Soon after, the Royal Navy dispatched 3 cruisers, HMS Pandora, HMS Forte, and HMS Hermes, to scour the waters where the Waratah had last been seen. The conditions were brutal, with heavy storms battering the ships. At one point, the HMS Hermes was damaged badly enough that it had to be taken in for repairs. Despite the intensity of these efforts, no trace of the Waratah was found. No wreckage, no lifeboats, and no survivors were ever confirmed. At one point, there was even a false alarm when another Blue Anchor Line ship was mistaken for the Waratah. Later, the company hired another vessel, the Union Castle cargo ship Sabine, to conduct a long search covering more than 14,000 miles of ocean. That search also came up empty. Months passed, and hope began to fade. In December 1909, 4 months after the Waratah disappeared, Lloyd's of London officially declared the ship lost. Families mourned without answers, and speculation began to spread about what might have happened. Newspapers carried stories about the tragedy, often emphasizing its mystery. Some pointed to Sawyer's dreams as eerie evidence of a premonition. Others reported on rumors that the ship had been unstable since its first voyage. For the public, the Waratah became more than just a missing ship. It became a ghost story of the sea, a modern vessel that had simply vanished. In 1910, an official inquiry by the Board of Trade was launched to investigate the disappearance. But the inquiry faced a major challenge. With no wreckage or survivors, there was very little evidence to work with. Witnesses who had traveled on earlier voyages gave mixed testimony. Some described serious problems with stability, while others insisted the ship had handled well. Experts debated whether the Waratah could have been dangerously top-heavy, making her vulnerable in rough seas, or whether she had simply encountered a storm too powerful for any ship to survive. In the end, the inquiry was unable to provide a definite answer. For those left behind, the lack of closure was devastating. More than 200 lives were lost, and families were left with nothing but questions. The Waratah had been a new ship, built with modern features, and certified as safe, and yet it had disappeared without a trace. This was perhaps the most unsettling part of the tragedy. A ship that was supposed to be reliable had failed in the most complete way possible. The disappearance of the SS Waratah quickly became more than just another maritime accident. Within weeks of the ship failing to arrive in Cape Town, newspapers around the world were covering the story with a mix of fear, speculation, and fascination. The Waratah was not an old or outdated vessel, but one of the newest and largest steamships in the Blue Anchor Line's fleet. It was supposed to represent modern safety and comfort, a vessel designed to carry emigrants, cargo, and first-class travelers across the seas with ease. Its sudden loss, without a trace, struck at public confidence in an age that believed technology had finally tamed the dangers of ocean travel. The first wave of reactions included disbelief. Many people simply did not want to accept that the Waratah could have sunk. Ships were sometimes delayed for days or weeks, and without wireless communication on board, there was no way to confirm its position. Some speculated that the ship had lost power and was drifting aimlessly. The idea was not far-fetched. In 1899, the SS Waikato had broken down near Cape Town and drifted for over 3 months before being rescued, covering more than 2,000 miles during that time. It seemed possible that the Waratah might still be out there, floating and waiting to be found. Families of passengers clung to this hope, believing that a rescue ship might bring back their loved ones alive. As weeks turned into months, however, no news came. The search had been extensive. Naval vessels and private ships alike had scoured the waters between Durban and Cape Town. They had searched as far out to sea as their coal supplies allowed, battling storms and rough seas, but found nothing. There were no lifeboats, no floating cargo, and no wreckage washed ashore. The ocean, vast and unforgiving, had given up nothing. This silence opened the door for speculation. Without clear evidence, theories began to multiply. One of the most persistent ideas was that the Waratah had suffered from serious stability problems, something hinted at by passengers on her first and second voyages. Several people had reported that the ship rolled more than others, and some had even warned that it seemed top-heavy. If true, this would have been a major flaw in her design. A ship with too much weight above the waterline could be vulnerable to capsizing, especially in heavy sea. The Board of Trade inquiry held in 1910 examined this theory carefully. Testimonies were heard from shipbuilders, inspectors, and former passengers. Experts pointed out that the Waratah had passed every inspection before being allowed to sail. She had even received the highest rating from Lloyd's of London, an organization known for strict standards. To suggest that she was dangerously unstable seemed to contradict the findings of these professional bodies. Supporters of the ship's design also noted that she was based on the SS Geelong, another Blue Anchor Line vessel of similar design that had sailed safely for years. Still, doubts remained. If the Waratah was truly as stable as her builders and owners claimed, why had so many passengers noticed unusual movements? One woman, who had traveled on the maiden voyage, described the ship as swaying more violently than others she had been on. Another said it was impossible to take a bath without being thrown about by the rolling. These accounts gave weight to the idea that the Waratah may indeed have been top-heavy. If that were the case, a sudden shift in cargo, or the impact of a powerful storm, could have caused the ship to roll too far and fail to right itself, leading to a rapid capsize. The possibility of sudden capsizing was particularly frightening because it would have given passengers and crew little time to react. In such a situation, lifeboats would likely not have been launched, and people might not have had a chance to escape. This could explain why no survivors or wreckage were found. If the Waratah had gone down quickly, everything and everyone on board might have been pulled under almost immediately. Another theory that gained attention at the time was the idea of an explosion. Steamships carried coal in large quantities, and fires in bunkers or problems with boilers were not uncommon. During her first voyage, the Waratah had already experienced a fire in her engine room, which had been controlled but raised concerns. Some wondered whether damage from that earlier fire had weakened a boiler or left hidden problems that later caused a catastrophic failure. Supporting this theory was the testimony of Captain John Bruce of the steamer Harlow. He claimed that on the evening of July 27, 1909, his crew had seen unusual smoke and lights on the horizon, about 10 miles away. Shortly after, they observed 2 bright flashes, followed by the sudden disappearance of the lights. Bruce suggested that this could have been the Waratah experiencing a coal bunker or boiler explosion. The account was widely reported in newspapers, but it had problems. For one, the sighting did not match up with the position of the Waratah as confirmed by the Clan McIntyre earlier that day. For the Harlow to have seen the Waratah, the ship would have had to turn back toward Durban, something for which there was no explanation. Even so, Bruce and his crew stood by their story, insisting that what they saw could have been the Waratah in its final moments. They even proposed searching near the mouth of the St. John River, where the lights had been seen. However, no evidence was ever found there. Over time, doubts grew about whether the Harlow's crew had simply misidentified another vessel or misinterpreted what they saw. Other theories also surfaced. Some suggested that the Waratah might have broken apart in heavy seas due to structural weakness, though inspections had shown no flaws in her construction. Others wondered whether she might have collided with a hidden reef or another ship, though no signs of such an event were ever discovered. The lack of wreckage made every theory difficult to prove. For families of the lost, the uncertainty was devastating. Unlike disasters where bodies or wreckage washed ashore, the Waratah left nothing. Relatives could not even be sure where their loved ones had died. The mystery added to their grief, creating a sense of unfinished mourning. The impact on the Blue Anchor Line was severe. Losing such a new and celebrated ship damaged the company's reputation beyond repair. Confidence among passengers collapsed, and eventually the line was sold to P&O, one of its competitors. The Waratah had not only taken lives, but also ended the independence of the company that built her. In the years that followed, efforts to solve the mystery continued. Searches were launched at various times, some privately funded by relatives of passengers, others organized by shipping interests. In 1910, a ship called the Wakefield was sent to look again, covering 15,000 miles, but like the earlier searches, it found nothing. Over the decades, as technology improved, new expeditions were occasionally mounted, but the ocean along the South African coast is vast and treacherous, making it nearly impossible to cover completely. To this day, no confirmed trace of the Waratah has ever been found. Historians often compare the Waratah to the Titanic, which sank 3 years later. Both ships were seen as modern marvels of their time, and both became symbols of how fragile human technology can be against the power of the sea. The difference, of course, is that the Titanic's wreck was eventually discovered, while the Waratah remains lost. For many, this makes the Waratah an even more haunting story. Over time, the mystery of the Waratah has taken on a life of its own. It has been included in books about maritime disappearances, and sometimes even compared to legends like the Flying Dutchman. The fact that one passenger, Claude Gustav Sawyer, left the ship just before it vanished, and that he had spoken of disturbing dreams, adds a ghostly element that has kept public interest alive. Whether one sees his dreams as coincidence, intuition, or something supernatural, they have become inseparable from the story. What makes the Waratah's disappearance so enduring is not just the tragedy itself, but the absence of answers. With no wreckage, no survivors, and no conclusive evidence, the story invites speculation. People want closure, but the sea has refused to give it. In that way, the Waratah has become more than just a lost ship. It is a symbol of the limits of human understanding, and a reminder that, even in an age of technology and progress, nature still holds mysteries we cannot solve. Even today, more than a century later, the Waratah continues to attract attention from researchers, divers, and storytellers. The ship may never be found, but its legacy endures, carried not only by the historical record, but also by the imagination. For those who study maritime history, it remains one of the greatest unsolved cases. For others, it is simply a haunting tale, a story of a ship that set out on a journey and never returned.